Good afternoon, and thank you for joining GSA for today's webinar as part of our GradChat series. My name is Natasha, and I'm GSA Senior Policy Coordinator. It's such a privilege today to host our webinar with our special guest, Paul Hornsby from the University of Melbourne Student Union's Advocacy Service. So before introducing our guest, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would like to pay respect to their elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who may be present today. In our GSA GradChat webinars, Wednesdays are dedicated to supporting academic excellence, and we bring in experts and specialists from the university, community organisations, and our partner organisations like UMSU to equip you with the resources and knowledge that you need during your journey as a graduate student. Today, we'll be hearing from Paul Hornsby on what you need to know about special consideration. Paul is a senior advocate from the UMSU Advocacy Service with 9 years of experience. Paul is incredibly knowledgeable on issues of university policy, and we're so lucky to have him join us today. For our listeners, if you have questions, please write them into the Q&A section. We'll just have time dedicated to questions at the end of our session. But if we don't get time to answer your question today, just leave your contact details and we'll follow up with you afterwards. And this session will be recorded and it will be made available on the GSA website. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today to talk to our graduate students about the special consideration process. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Natasha. And hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Paul Hornsby. I'm a senior advocate with the UMSU Advocacy Service. I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about what we do. We provide independent advice for students on administrative and academic matters that they might be faced with during their time at the university. So some of the more common issues that we would assist students with would be around academic progress, assessment disputes, academic misconduct, and one of the major ones is what I'm here to speak with you about today, which is special consideration. So I hope that after this session, you will have at least a foundational understanding of what special consideration is, and most importantly, what sort of qualifies for eligibility and how you should go about the application process if you find yourself in a position where you might need to apply. What is special consideration for? To follow on from that, special consid is available to students who have had their studies significantly impacted by exceptional or extenuating circumstances outside of their control. So this is granted to enable eligible students to continue to progress successfully without compromising the integrity of assessment. So this can be granted for a whole range of assessment requirements. It could be specific assessment tasks just in a single subject, or whole teaching sessions for multiple subjects. Very important topic of eligibility. The assessment and results policy of the university stipulates that a special consid is available if a student is genuinely and significantly affected by exceptional and extenuating circumstances outside the student's control. For example, acute illness, loss or bereavement, hardship or trauma, or events or circumstances of national or state significance within cultural, sporting, military, emergency service or legal domains which require a student's participation, or faculty sanctioned academic activities, for example, presenting at a conference. That last one there is a relatively new addition. To continue on the topic of eligibility, further along in the assessment and results policy, they cover what is generally recognised as acceptable grounds for special consideration. It's not an exhaustive list, but it includes acute illness or serious injury on the day of an exam or during the period immediately leading up to an exam or an assessment due date, a bereavement or other serious emotional disturbance, for example, witnessing or being the victim of serious crime, sudden loss of accommodation or family violence, hardship or trauma such as a car accident, sudden loss of income or severe disruption to domestic arrangements, and or significant religious or cultural reasons which impact a student's ability to undertake or complete assessment on a particular day or at a particular time. So in other words, there is a pretty high threshold of seriousness in terms of the circumstances that will qualify you for special consideration. There's also a couple of different types of special consideration. Now, the one that we are mostly focusing on today is special consideration in unexpected circumstances. And that's because the timing of today's webinar and the purpose of the information session, we're in the lead up to end of semester assessment, of course, which is a time where a peak time for special consideration applications, and that would be for the unforeseen or sudden sort of circumstances that spring up that would qualify for this type of special consideration. So that can include instances where you're on track to complete an assignment and suddenly become unwell, or you're sick in the days leading up to your exam and it impacts your ability to study for or sit the exam itself. And so the best way to think about it is, if the situation is something you are not anticipating would happen, then unexpected circumstances is probably the best application to pursue. A really important component of the application process is the timing and making sure that if you do need to apply, that you meet your obligations in terms of making a timely application. For unexpected circumstances applications, what that means is an application must be made within 4 working days of the examination date or the assessment due date. That would count from, for example, the day after the exam took place. There'd be 4 days from that time. Just to touch on briefly, so you understand what the other type of special consideration is and what the distinction is between from this to unexpected circumstances, is for circumstances where a student might have a medical condition which is known to them, and therefore it's going to be likely that as they progress through their studies, they might need adjustments to their work. Then you can apply for special consideration ongoing support. There's a whole range of reasons why students may need adjustments in order to satisfy the subject requirements. It might mean a condition that just needs extra time to complete an exam, for example, or you're unable to meet a minimum attendance requirement during semester. So essentially, if you know ahead of time that a health condition is likely to disrupt your ability to complete assessments, you should apply for ongoing support. In doing so, as a general rule, it's recommended timing-wise that you apply for this as soon as possible. So if you were commencing a course and you could do that at the earliest possible stage after you've completed your enrolment, or in the lead up to a new semester where you can get things put in place earlier so that these things can be arranged at a time where it is hopefully less stressful. There can sometimes be particular deadlines that will indicate how long you have to apply, especially if it's going to involve alternative exam arrangements. So the best thing to do, if you think you might qualify for this type of support, is to contact Student Equity and Disability Support, otherwise known as SEDS, as soon as possible to understand what's required with an application for your particular situation. Basically, the later you leave it, the more difficult it might be for the university to put adjustments in place. So on to the issue of documentation to support an application for special consideration. The first thing to understand is that the university must assess each application to determine whether it meets the criteria set out in the aforementioned assessment and results policy. SEDS, the department responsible for that task. The single most common reason that we see genuine genuine applications assessed as ineligible by SEDS is a problem with the supporting documentation. So it's absolutely critical that you have a good understanding of the type of documentation that will strengthen an application. So your healthcare professional needs to state that they have objectively assessed you to be severely impacted by whatever condition you have presented to them with, what the dates of the severe impact were, and how specifically this has affected your capacity to complete assessment. So the most common way and the recommended way to capture this information, whether it's in relation to a physical or mental ailment, is via the health professional report form, or the HPR. There's two kinds of HPR forms, and they are in relation to the two different types of special consideration, so unexpected circumstances or ongoing support. Obviously important that you pick the right one. These forms are designed to help your healthcare practitioner to supply the details required by SEDS to assess the application as eligible or not. The HPR form itself doesn't leave a lot of space for your practitioner to detail your illness, and there's a reason for that. It's because they only need to say that you are unwell or suffering from a condition. The important parts on the form are the date of your consultation or appointment, the exact period of impact, using dates, and the ways that you are impacted in relation to the assessment tasks in question. The dates need to align with the timing of the affected assessment, and the impacts will determine whether you've been impacted sufficiently to meet the threshold for eligibility. So what all that basically means is that you or your doctor do not need to go into great detail about the nature of the illness itself. It's just about demonstrating the level of impact, the period of time that it impacted, and the ways that it impacted on your ability to complete the task. There are some other forms of documentation that can be provided in support of an application. Now, although statutory declarations are mentioned on university websites in relation to evidence of bereavement, in practice, the Advocacy Service has found that SEDS will not accept a stat dec as the sole form of supporting documentation for an application. If it's not a health-related condition which can be evidenced via the HPR form, then you would need to try and source some other independent verification. An example of this would be a victim of crime using a police report, students impacted by religious or cultural observance using a letter from a religious or community leader. But the key thing there is to maximise your chances of getting an application accepted, third-party verification of your circumstances is usually critical. The application process itself, you can lodge timely applications online. There's links for these applications through your student portal and LMS, or and once you've submitted an application for special consideration, including all the supporting documentation, you should receive an outcome within 5 working days. Sometimes at peak periods that does not always happen, but that's the time frame in which SEDS should be operating. Hopefully, of course, an application would be approved and an appropriate adjustment is arranged. However, if it doesn't work out that way and the application is deemed ineligible, there are some further avenues available to challenge that decision. Just a quick note on late applications now. Any application submitted more than 4 working days after the assessment, as we touched on before, is considered a late application. Now, this creates an additional hurdle for getting an application accepted. You can still submit a late application. However, in a sense, the later it is, the harder it gets. The reason for that is that a late application must address 2 hurdles. The first of those is must clearly establish extenuating circumstances preventing timely lodgement of the application, with independent documentation evidencing these extenuating circumstances and how those circumstances prevented a timely application. And 2, they must clearly set out the reason special consideration is sought, with specific reference to the nature, dates and duration of impact supported by a HPR form. So with late applications, you firstly need to demonstrate compelling reasons for why you were unable to apply in a timely manner before they will actually look at the substantive merit of the application itself. So we do have to always advise students submitting a late application that the threshold is quite high to get it accepted. So just to continue on down the process, if a decision goes against you with an initial application and it's deemed ineligible, you will get the opportunity to request a review of that initial decision. You can only do this once within 5 working days of receiving the outcome, and only if you have a legitimate belief that a decision was made without proper consideration of facts, evidence, or circumstances, or there was a failure to adhere to appropriate or relevant published policies and procedures, or a penalty applied to you which you deemed to be inappropriate, or you experienced unfair treatment, prejudice, or bias. So the most common reasons for an application being rejected are insufficient impact. So SEDS is not seeing enough evidence in the documentation that the student was impacted enough by these circumstances to prevent their completion of the assessment task. A late application not being accepted, as we touched on with the difficulties of having a late application actually get through to the assessment stage, that the dates of impact don't correlate with the timing of the assessment task. So it might be that the HPR form is indicating that a student was affected for a certain week, but the timing of the assessment task was outside of that week, and so SEDS makes a decision that it wouldn't have had an impact on the ability to complete a task, or that supporting documentation does not adequately verify the circumstances. So when requesting a review, you should provide reasons as to why you feel you have grounds for the initial decision to be overturned, and you can also include any relevant further documentation that you may have that was not initially provided. Again, within 5 working days, you should get one of the following outcomes: that the review was successful or the original decision was overturned. And so your application for review was successful and your assessment options will then be reconsidered by your faculty. Or an unsuccessful review, original decision upheld. The review was not successful, and so the original outcome is unchanged. At that point, there are still a couple of steps available for you to continue to challenge those decisions. The next one of those stages is to lodge a formal grievance. So this then moves the matter out of student equity and disability support and would go to the Office of the Academic Registrar. So if your request for a review is unsuccessful and you still feel you've got a legitimate claim, you can escalate it via a formal grievance in accordance with the Student Complaints and Grievances Policy. Generally, a very clear new support letter or HPR form would be required to address the reasons the application has been assessed as ineligible. The Advocacy Service can advise you on any ways that you may be able to strengthen your grievance letter before submission. And then finally, should you go through the grievance stage and also have that rejected, your final step would be an appeal to the academic board. This is the final avenue of appeal within the university. You can read about that process on the academic board's website. Pay particular attention to step 3, where they direct you to contact the Student Union Advocacy Service. That's because we can advise you on your prospects for an appeal, the grounds upon which it could be based, because there are very specific grounds that an appeal can be heard on, and the best way to convey your arguments. And we're also able to attend the appeal hearing with you and assist you with making your case to the board. So that is the summary of the full process of applying for special consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have, and I can also flick back through the slideshow and bring up any other information, any of that information again, if people need it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. This has been incredibly informative. I know I've learned a lot, and hopefully this has been really useful information for our attendees as well. We actually do have quite a few questions coming through the chat. So why don't we go through some of those?
Sure.
So someone has asked, is there any mechanism to ask for an assessment resubmission for a failed grade due to a medical or health condition?
So this would fall into the category of a late application for special consideration, because after release of results, it gets incredibly difficult. So there's actually a couple of options available to you there. One is to apply for late special consideration, but bearing in mind that, as I touched on before, with the higher threshold required for a late application to be accepted, that would be even higher again if it's after the release of results. So it would mean that you would need to be able to provide compelling evidence that you were unable to apply before that time, and in a timely manner. So it is possible, but it can be very difficult. The other option a student may have in that situation is a separate process, which is to apply for a fee remission in special circumstances. And that has its own set of criteria, which is actually based on government legislation rather than just the university's own policy or criteria. So look, I guess the answer to the question is yes, it is possible to try and have a failed grade sort of removed from the student record is the terminology a lot of students contact us with, because they really want to get that score off their student record card and off their transcript, understandably so. But yeah, the process by which that would need to occur requires a very high threshold of evidence to demonstrate that you weren't able to do it in a timely manner.
And just a follow-up question on that, if a student did want to apply for special consideration or a fee remission in that circumstance, where would they go for help on that?
Yeah, to us, definitely.
Yep. And what kind of help would you provide to them?
Yeah, so we've actually got a template that we provide for students who are applying for late special consideration, and it very clearly sets out the application in two separate stages, so that the student can address that first issue of why the application is not being made until this time, and then secondly to go on and address the substantive merit of the application. So with the same process is in place in terms of the steps that a student can go through with an application. So if it's a very late application and SEDS comes back and says, no, we don't accept your reason for this being late, you will still get the opportunity to seek the review. You'll still get the opportunity to go through the grievance process and all the way through to that academic board appeal. It's just that it gets more difficult, but that's not to say that it can't succeed. And we do have students that apply late and have very compelling reasons for doing so. And whether it's at the initial stages or whether it needs to go all the way through to an appeal to the board, we do see some students have success with it. And look, we assist students who are sometimes seeking withdrawals from subjects that were completed years ago. And they might go back to try and get an issue from a subject in 2014 resolved. And it can be done. but yeah, it does require a lot of compelling evidence. But yes, by all means, if anyone found themselves in that situation, to please get in touch with the advocacy service, and we'd be able to advise you on what your prospects might be, and how best to go about putting your case forward.
Fantastic. That's great to know. We have a question. I'm worried my internet will fail during some of my online exams. Can I apply for special consideration if that happens?
That's an excellent question in this COVID age of online assessment. This was an issue that we absolutely could foresee being an issue, and the university actually introduced a separate type of special consideration, which I've not touched on in the presentation today, but I'm happy to talk about in response to the question, which is called technical consideration. And so, in recognition of some of the things that might be problematic with online assessment, and with students having to do exams at home or off campus, that those concerns were raised, and a lot of students were worried about it, and in response to that, the university has introduced a category called technical consideration, which is specifically for those types of issues. So it could be internet dropping out, or a problem with at the subject coordinator's end, or something, anything that goes wrong technically that has an impact on the exam. That would be the category to apply for. So it'd actually be a separate one to what we've been talking about today.
Great. And just a follow-up question on that. Let's say I'm in my online exam and my computer explodes. What type of evidence should I collect for my technical consideration application?
I'm just trying to sort of recall what the most common sorts of things that we saw, and what we saw students providing. But what the university has done, and it might be a good idea to go to the university's advice page on technical consideration about this, because my recollection from semester one was that they set up a particular contact point for students to get in touch with as soon as they experienced any issues with that. And so I think that was a way to for students to raise the concerns as soon as they were happening, which helps in terms of time stamping what was going on, and also having a dialogue with university IT about what the problem was. So I think that was the main thing, that whatever record was obtained from that, from seeking that support when it happened. Also, I think it might have been the case that if the issue occurred from the university's end rather than the student's end, that was something the university could check on fairly easily, or the coordinator of the subject would be able to verify. But yeah, I think that I mean, for example, if your laptop went kaput during the exam or something like that, I think that the log of that contact to university IT would be critical. And then I guess what you'd also look at obtaining would be, repair shop receipts, or things on documentation from a repair shop that would verify what the damage was that was fixed, and things like that.
Thanks. That's a great idea. Getting repair shop receipts. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's obviously a bit of a new phenomenon. So the other types of special consideration, we have a lot of precedent to draw on, and there's the documentation is sort of more clear about what's required, whereas this is a little bit of a new thing, and obviously different circumstances. But yeah, that would be the type of thing to look at. And look, and like I said before, I'd really encourage everyone to read up on the university's advice page on it, just to see exactly what they direct students to do and suggest students to do, because, you know, coming up to this exam period, and exams are obviously stressful enough as it is, let alone having to worry about any technical issues you might have while you're trying to do it. So I think, you know, if you know what you would need to do in that situation from the outset, that would hopefully alleviate some of that anxiety.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's definitely a good idea to review the university's information on special consideration before your exam, just in case something unexpected happens while you're in the exam. We actually have a lot more questions. So we've got a couple about students with caring responsibilities. So what kind of special consideration could a student get, or do you have any advice for students with caring responsibilities to access special consideration?
Yeah, I think that that would probably be the sort of situation where a student would consider applying for ongoing support. Now, I obviously can't speak on behalf of SEDS, but I think with caring responsibilities, certainly can and should qualify, and it might mean that ongoing support might provide a situation where, just to explain a little bit more, maybe this might help with ongoing support, because I was mainly covering unexpected circumstances. Ongoing support is designed to sort of manage problems as they come up, rather than with unexpected circumstances, which is more about trying to manage something after the bad thing has happened. So if it's a situation where you're able to evidence your carer responsibilities and have supporting documentation which sort of verifies the type of things it requires you to do, then that could qualify you for ongoing support, where you can get what's called an academic adjustment plan, which is something that sets out some recommended adjustments for students in certain situations, so that you can present that document directly to the subject coordinator, where they might, on the basis of that, be able to approve something directly, rather than having to go through the centralised process. And it also means that students can get, now for carer responsibilities, this might not be as relevant, but say for alternative exam arrangements, where, you know, if a student's got issues that make it more difficult for them to, you know, sit for long periods or something like that, they can get extra reading time, they can get extra break time, sit the exam in a different room, that kind of stuff. So that's just to give some examples of what kind of adjustments can be implemented for ongoing support. And you know, I guess for carer responsibilities, one of the things, the examples that I touched on before, it might mean that you can get approval to be exempt from a hurdle requirement. For example, you know, if those carer responsibilities are going to mean it makes it difficult for you to get to every tutorial, and if there's a hurdle on tutorial attendance, an example might be that you're able to get that hurdle waived to acknowledge those carer responsibilities. So yeah, I hope that's sort of answered the question for, but I would recommend that for anyone in that situation, that the best advice at this stage would be to contact Student Equity and Disability Support and get their, you know, set out the situation for them and get their advice and their feedback on whether it would qualify for ongoing support.
Fantastic. We have a more kind of general question. What are the most common situations where a student would need to access special consideration?
Yeah. So the most common would be acute illness, like being struck down by a virus or flu or something like that around the time of an assessment task being due, or around the time of an exam coming up. And that does include the preparation for an exam as well, So even if you're recovered and you're feeling in great shape by the day of the exam, that doesn't cancel out the fact that you might have spent 3 days in the lead up to it completely out of commission and unable to study. So that can still qualify you for special consideration. So yeah, the most common things are short-term illnesses that come on right at the most inopportune time, and you might be completely on track to get that 4,000 word assignment done by the due date, but then get hit by illness in the last few days, and it means you can't get it done. And so that's what we see most commonly. There's accidents really that whether it's including bike accidents, car accidents, illnesses that were unexpected. They're the most common, but we certainly do still see a range of different reasons for why. The other thing that can be quite common is for students' personal circumstances to get in the way of their capacity to study. So something like a bereavement, or an exacerbation of a mental health condition, or it might be that a few things all happen at once that triggers a sort of an increased state of anxiety. Think that those sorts of things that can come up without expectation.
So in that situation where something unexpected has happened, maybe a loved one has died, or a student has gone through a breakup, in terms of documentation, would they just go to their doctor and get them to write a note about their, well, you mentioned they don't have to write what's actually wrong on the note, but their reduced capacity?
Yeah, that's right. And I think this is one of the things that is problematic with the process, and that students sometimes get caught out by, because when you get sick, it's not commonly the first thing you think of, that you've got to take care of your university admin, and sometimes students might not be able to get a doctor's appointment immediately, or they might not even be well enough to get to a doctor until they improve a little bit. And so sometimes that can present problems where the student, can't get to a doctor until 3 days after the exam or something. And SEDS then look at that and think that the dates don't align, and that the doctor can't verify what their condition was from those 3 days ago when they're actually applying for the special consideration for. So that's why we placed emphasis on the dates of impact and being able to demonstrate that they correlate with the assessment task. So look, it's a really good idea to be mindful of the fact that if you do get unwell, that probably the earlier you can get to a doctor, and the earlier that you can get them to complete a HPR form for you, the better. And look, if you can't get a doctor's appointment for a few days, that it certainly doesn't mean that you've got no chance of getting special consideration approved. But generally speaking, the best approach would be the earlier you can get to a doctor, the better.
Yeah, great. And then another question just around religious observance. So if there's a cultural or religious holiday that is unknown in the mainstream, but you have to attend, how would that work in terms of accessing special consideration?
Yeah, so it would mostly be reliant on, again, the supporting documentation, and probably the best thing in that sort of situation would be to get a letter of support from a relevant religious leader, or the organisation, or if, for example, if obviously there are, as the question has asked about, holidays or observances that aren't particularly well known in the mainstream, that should not mean that, the university won't acknowledge its importance. So long as there's a letter to verify that, this is something that the student's required to attend as part of their religious beliefs, and then the university should not be questioning that type of documentation. And in similar to any information they're getting from a health practitioner. Now, there can be circumstances where they might need to contact that health practitioner just to clarify certain information or something like that, but they should never be questioning the authority of the decision. And so if it's from an appropriate person, it should be enough to get the application approved. And in that situation, if a religious leader was writing a letter to say this student needs to attend this on this day, that the university should accept that.
Fantastic. And another really general question, what kind of support can students get from UMSU Advocacy to help in applications for special consideration?
Yep. So it's probably most common for students to contact us after they've had an initial application rejected and that they need then help with trying to request a review of that decision and put forward their reasons for why the decision should be changed. So, and that's because, at the application stage initially, the information on, the university's website and on our website is pretty clear in what you need to try and obtain and how to go through the process, and it's pretty easily accessible. So students don't often really need help with us at the initial application stage, even though we'd be happy to advise students on at that point if they needed to, and we can suggest what sort of supporting documentation would be would strengthen their chances of getting it approved, and what sort of information should be contained therein. But yeah, like I said, it's after an application might be rejected that we are much more involved, and so we can then assist the student with setting out their arguments to seek a review, and the best way for us to be able to do that is if the student sends us their application documents as well as the outcome notification from SEDS. Our service operates on under a very strict confidentiality arrangement, and student information is handled with the appropriate care and sensitivity. We would then be able to make an assessment of the information the student has provided and the outcome that they've received. Hopefully, this doesn't always happen, but hopefully the university has actually provided some reasons for their decision rather than just a fairly cursory, sorry, it's been rejected, because obviously the more reasoning they provide for the decision, the easier it is to assess how you might go about seeking a review. But we would then work with the student to make sure they put forward their request for a review in the best way possible. If we think that further or additional supporting documentation might help to tip it, that we'd advise the student on that as well, and what sort of information might be missing. Like I said before, that the most common reason we see for a legitimate application being rejected is problems with the supporting documentation and it not addressing what it needs to address. So that's probably often the thing we look at the most. And then if that is unsuccessful, we would continue to assist the student through each stage that is still available to them. So the formal grievance stage, we've got template letters that we can provide for students so that they're setting out the letter in the right way and addressing all the appropriate policy provisions. We provide extensive feedback and suggestions on how that grievance letter could be improved. And then at the academic board appeal stage, our involvement is can be even greater, in the sense that we would be involved in helping the student to put together the strongest appeal letter that they can. And if they're granted an appeal hearing with an appeal panel, we would attend that hearing with the student as well. And at an academic board hearing, we actually have standing to speak on the student's behalf as well. So there's other meetings that students might attend across the university where, you know, for example, in a misconduct hearing or an academic progress meeting, where the student does have the option to bring a support person with them, but they can't speak on the student's behalf in those meetings. It's a very limited role. But in an academic board appeal, we actually can make representations on the student's behalf. So we make sure we go through to that end stage with them as well.
Brilliant. That's such a fantastic level of support that students can access through that advocacy service. We just have one more legitimate question about the applying for special consideration if their studies are impacted by faculty sanctioned academic events, such as presenting as a conference. So that was on one of the earlier slides. So that's a really interesting reason to access special consideration. So would you be able to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, like I said, that's a relatively new addition to the criteria that can qualify. Look, and to be honest, I think it would be, much less common than the other categories of special consideration and the other reasons why students might need it. I think that this would probably most commonly apply to research higher degree students, where we're presenting to a conference or something like that is quite possibly or probably going to happen. Perhaps other levels of master's research and that sort of thing. I guess there's other, there can be other situations where a student might get an opportunity through their studies to participate in some sort of not strictly a university activity, but is in relation to their studies or connected, where the university really should be supporting that student in allowing them to take up that opportunity and not standing in their way of being able to do it. And so that's why that was brought in, was to try and make sure students who have those opportunities can take them without having their assessment in their course compromised. And so that it would probably operate very similarly if an opportunity like that clashed around an exam or something like that, and that the university could approve the special consideration for that, and would still probably put in the same type of adjustment as a student would get who fell ill on the day of the exam, which would be to award them a special exam during that special exam period, which happens about a month after the standard exam period. So you'd still get that chance to take that exam as well as engage with the other activity. So we don't see a lot of it, and yeah, it's a relatively new category, but I think one that has obvious reasons for being in place.
Wonderful. That's really interesting to know about that, and to hear about how special consideration can be used to support academic achievement. It's not just for if you fall ill on the day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to the question about getting special consideration if your team loses the grand final. We might just wrap it up.
I would support that, incidentally.
Yeah, is that a type of emotional trauma that students could get special consideration for?
Very much so, I would suggest.
Interesting take. So that should bring us to the end of today's webinar. This has been incredibly informative, and I really do hope that it's been useful to our students to understand that special consideration process and how to access assistance from UMSU Advocacy, especially if your application does get knocked back. So if you ever find yourself in a position of needing special consideration, you'll know what to do. So I'd like to extend a huge thank you to you, Paul, for such an amazing presentation, as well as a thank you to the students who joined us today and sent in some questions.
You're welcome. Thanks very much for having me.
And GSA really is committed to supporting graduate students and working with our partner organisations, including UMSU, to bring you webinars and resources supporting graduate students in their journey and to achieve academic excellence during their time as graduate students. So on Tuesdays, in future, our webinars are focused on transition to work. Wednesdays, so today, for academic excellence, and Thursdays are for promoting engaged and healthy communities. So hopefully that is good preparation for the exam period ahead, but we do have some other upcoming events for the end of semester period. So tomorrow afternoon, we have a webinar from CAPS on staying healthy at the end of semester. And in the evening, we have a free Pilates session, which all grad students and staff are welcome to join us for. So I hope you will join us for these events. And as we head into Swap Back, GSA is also running our usual coffee voucher program. So students definitely keep an eye out for that as well. So thank you so much again, Paul. See you all next time, and bye for now.